My Bible's open to Mark chapter 9. That's where I invite you to open your Bible and place a bookmark. Mark chapter 9. Blessing to be together, to enjoy what makes Sundays the best day of the week. Our time together in worship, our time together in study, our time together in prayer. I hope you're catching it. Our time together as the family of God. It is what makes Sundays the best day of the week. We're so glad to have this time. Thankful for our visitors to be with us. This portion of our worship service, we spend our time in the text. And so that's what we'll do this morning. You have questions about the things we're doing, questions about the things we study, we'd be glad to visit with you, try to help you better understand the book of God and draw closer to our King Jesus Christ. We're glad to be, here it is, together. Mark 9, please, verse 17. And one from the multitude answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. And wherever he seizes him, he throws him down, he foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. And I spoke to your disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. He answered him and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. And they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. He asked his father, How long has this been happening to him? He said, From childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the father cried out, saying with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I think confusion on this subject matter has caused significant harm in the way that people think about these very important subjects. And I think the confusion that relates to these subjects has added to that frustration, so that individuals who are actually in one category think they're in another category. Individuals who are fighting with this problem or feel like this problem's happening are really only dealing with this other thing, and there's just this great big mess of confusion where people don't really even understand what they're facing. And then they feel guilty because they either do understand or don't understand or think they understand but really don't understand, and it's just a confusing... Are you confused? You confused now? It's just a confusing mess sometimes because we have it in our heads a certain way without understanding the clear distinctions between some of these ideas. Well, folks, I want to work on that a little this morning. I want to actually take two stories in the Gospel of Mark that I think will help us kind of zero in on some of these concepts. Disbelief, doubt, and developing faith. So here's how it's going to happen. We're going to look at two stories that help us work out the issues on the first 2 points, and then we're going to tie in a whole bunch of other passages, all in the Gospel of Mark this morning, that'll help us really get a handle on developing faith. All of our studies this morning, as far as the sermons were concerned, came from the Gospel of Mark, and all of them have related, this lesson to you brought by the Gospel of Mark. And all of this is related to our daily Bible reading. So I hope you are benefiting from that as well, but that's where we're working out of. That's why we're working out of Mark. And so let's do that this morning. I want to handle these things, two stories, and then we'll intersperse some verses for that third consideration. Let's better handle disbelief. Look at Mark 11, please. Mark 11, please. Mark 11, beginning in verse 27. Mark 11, beginning in verse 27. They came again to Jerusalem. And as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and scribes and elders came to him. They said to him, By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority to do these things? Jesus answered and said to them, I will also ask you one question, then answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? Answer me. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, If we say from heaven, he will say, why then did you not believe him? But if we say from men, they feared the people. For all counted John to have been a prophet indeed. And they answered and said to Jesus, we do not know. And Jesus answered them and said, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. Disbelief and doubt are often conflated. They're often conflated, kind of mixed together, sometimes confused, interlocked in some minds, and that could not be farther from the truth. Disbelief is not doubt. Disbelief is a firm rejection of the information. It is a denial of the information, okay? And so we need to understand that. What's happening in Mark chapter 11, folks, is a rejection, an opposition to the information. Not wrestling with the information. So when sometimes, and this happens, when some people reject the information, they'll say, I'm just having doubts. No, you're not. No, that, a rejection of the information, it might come from a place of doubts originally, but doubt and disbelief are not the same thing. Consider what's happening here in Mark chapter 11. And maybe the question we should ask of this is, how can we tell the difference? How can we tell the difference? Well, it all goes back to two ideas: the questions and the answers. Sometimes disbelief becomes pretty apparent by the question we ask, or perhaps the motivation behind the question. But sometimes it is the response to the answer of the question. You see that in Mark chapter 11, by the way? Maybe, I think the context would say probably not, but maybe the question they're asking in verse 28 is a sincere question, but their rejection of all information from Jesus Christ is the problem behind disbelief. They don't want to believe what He has to say. They don't want to listen to what He has to say, and so they argue among themselves in verses 31 and 32. Look at this. They reason among themselves. That gives us a pretty good hint right there. It's not that they're doubting with the information. It's not that they're trying to struggle through it and figure it out. It's that they're trying their dead level best to ignore it. Reasoning among themselves. Okay, if we say this, he's going to say that. And if we say this, he's going to say, no, we don't know what to do here. You see, folks? Disbelief, doubts are not the same thing. Go back one chapter earlier to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, this little passage here will help us a little too. Mark chapter 10, beginning in verse 17. As he was going on the road, one came running, knelt before him, asked him, "Good teacher, what shall I do that I may inherit eternal life?" I got to say, I think that's an honest question. I think it's a sincere question. I think it's a good question. Jesus says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, that is God. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Do not defraud. Honor your father and your mother." He answered and said to him, "Teacher, all these I have observed from my youth." Here's the problem. Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said, "One thing you lack. Go your way, sell whatever you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, take up the cross, and follow me." And he was sad at his word, and went away grieved, for he had great possession. You see, actually, in this story, the deterioration. You see what starts with a sincere question ends with a sincere rejection. What's the problem? Well, I don't believe it's a situation of, I'm just kind of doubting that this is really... No. I think it's a rejection. It's a disbelief. It's an obstinacy that says, I won't go with what you want me to do. But it would be dishonest to say, well, the rich young ruler, he was just really struggling. He was just really struggling with some questions he couldn't get answers to. No, he was fighting with the fact that he didn't like the answer he got. Sometimes, folks, an honest question finds itself facing an honest answer that it doesn't like. And instead of being honest about the situation, turns in dishonesty and says, I'm simply struggling with my faith right now. Folks, I think we need to be very clear about that. This is why we need a good understanding of some of these concepts, because I think it helps us really latch on to what the core issue is. In fact, go back to Mark chapter 11, please. when you have this interaction, Jesus spots all this nonsense. Verse 33, well, we don't know. Is it that really they didn't know? No. It's that they didn't want to accept what it was. It's a disbelief, a rejection. And so what does Jesus say? Oh, okay, that's fine. Neither will I tell you. You're not going to be honest with me about this. I'm just not going to give you an answer. And I want you to see this in the context. What Jesus then goes on and does and gives the parable of the wicked vine dressers. Chapter 12, verse 1. He began to speak to them in parables. A man planted a vineyard, set a hedge around it, dug a place for the wine vat, built a tower. He leased it to the vine dressers and went into a far country. Think about the concepts already introduced. Here's this owner who has set up everything to entrust to these people. Sound a little bit like God with Israel? He sets them up wonderfully. They're set up for life. They've just got to take care of their end of the responsibility, do their job. Verse 2, at harvest time he sent a servant to the vine dressers that he might receive from the vine dressers some of the fruit of the vineyard. They took him, beat him, sent him away empty-handed. Sound a little like the Old Testament? It should. God set them up, and they rejected him. Verse 4, again, he sent them another servant. And at him they threw stones, wounded him in his head, sent him away, shamefully treated. And again he sent another, and they killed him. And many others, beating some, killing some. Therefore, still having one son, his beloved, he also sent him to them, saying, at the last, they will respect my son. Sound a little bit like the Bible story, folks? Verse 7, but those vine dressers said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. They took him, killed him, cast him out of the vineyard. Therefore, what will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the vine dressers and give the vineyard to others. Have you not read the scripture? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it was marvelous in our eyes. Here it is, verse 12. They sought to lay hold of him, but feared the multitude, for they knew he had spoken the parable against them. And they left him and went away. Who's the they and the them here? Well, it's the same people who come to him in chapter 11, verse 27 with questions. You see, Jesus spots this. This is not a situation where people are struggling with belief. This is not a situation where they're wrestling through the information, trying to better understand it and draw closer to God as a result. This is a situation where they're fighting tooth and nail to reject what He's saying. And part of what Jesus does with the parable is saying, yeah, and that's exactly what all your forefathers did before you. Folks, disbelief and doubt are not the same thing. You could go on and read chapter 12. There's a reason so much of Mark 12 is oppositional, and it's because of some of what's happening right here. Let me work on that second idea a little bit. Go back to Mark 9, please. Let's talk about doubt for a second. Mark 9. Mark 9. We won't read the whole thing again, but I want to pick back up in verse 21, or verse 20. Let's do verse 20. They brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him. He fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. He asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? He said, from childhood. Often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believe. And immediately the father of the child, cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I want you to see this, folks. How long has the father been dealing with this? All of the child's life. You get it? Verse 21, from childhood. From childhood. You ever dealt with your children going through some hard things? And what does every parent want? I want this to be over for my child. I would take it myself. If it means I'm the one who's sick, if it means I'm the one who's in the ER, if it means I'm the one with a broken arm, I would do it for them. Isn't that every parent? Can you feel the desperation in the father's voice here in Mark 9? From childhood, this man has had to jump in and save his child from fire, from drowning himself, from harming himself. Does that sound like a dad who's pretty frazzled by the whole situation now? I brought him to your disciples. They couldn't help him. Boy, that doesn't really engender faith, does it? Lord, if you can do anything, just please help my son. And the Lord's response, if you can believe. You see that? Oh, I love that. He says, if you can do anything, and Jesus says, actually, if you can believe. It's not that Jesus lacks power. It's that He wants this man's faith to be expressed. If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes, and the father of the child cries out, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Folks, this is exactly what we're discussing. The difference between doubt and disbelief. I could stop here and you already see the difference, don't you? Those in Mark 11 are not like the Father in Mark 9. There's not this desperation to reject the information. There's this struggle to harmonize the information. There's this fight to understand the information and to live in view of it. Calling disbelief doubt is dishonest. Because the issue is, once the information has been dispensed, we got to come to terms with it. Nobody, maybe a friend comes in and says, I bought a new car. And they say, what color is it? A friend says, well, I drive a white car. Bought a brand new white car. You might say, I don't believe you. I'm struggling to believe you bought a white car. But what happens once you step outside in the parking lot and see a white car? Can you consistently and honestly say, I'm struggling to believe you bought a white car? No, it doesn't work that way. That would be dishonest, wouldn't it? Because we've been confronted by the information. So folks, to continue to look at the information of the gospel story and say, well, I don't believe, I'm struggling to believe. No. You're not struggling to believe it. You're struggling to be convicted by it, perhaps. Or you're struggling with rejecting it. Now, that is not to recognize that we don't have some work to do. I want to come to that, because at some point right now you're thinking, I've been really hard on people who struggle with their faith. Actually, I'm trying not to be. That's where I want to go with this, okay? But recognizing, if our mind is made up before the information is presented, this is not a situation we're wrestling with doubt. It's a situation where we're trying to come to terms with rejection. The mind can't be made up first. Too often, folks, this is where this goes. Brethren are so hard on themselves, struggling with some concept they're doubting, struggling with some piece of information, and not distinguishing disbelief and doubt. Man, I'm struggling with this, whatever it is. I just must not have any faith. That's not how this works. Struggling with one concept, struggling with many concepts, it doesn't mean you have no faith. I will say, though, folks, we've not always helped ourselves in these situations. One writer observed, university-level questions don't go away with elementary school answers. We've been guilty of that. Somebody asks a really good question, and either we give, 4-second answer, best you're getting, buddy, or we're just dismissive altogether. Oh, that's a silly thing to doubt. That's a silly thing to wonder. That doesn't really help people come out of those moments where they're questioning some things. Part of the remedy for that is accepting honest questions and trying your best to give an honest answer. That's part of the remedy, is making sure that we're going somewhere with this information. I would also say in our culture, it's kind of weird. We kind of praise doubt like it's some sort of virtue. Like it's more enlightened somehow. Like, you're doubting? Man, that's the better. No, it's not. It's not naturally better. It's not wrong to doubt. It's not bad to doubt, but it's not innately better to doubt. Somebody's like, I've never really doubted my faith. And we look at that like it's either unattainable or maybe they're not even being honest. I have met a few people that have never really doubted their faith. But more people that I've met have had serious doubts, have wrestled through some really heavy questions, and did their best to try to understand them better so that they could live in a convicted way of life. And maybe that's kind of the better understanding of some of this. Not all doubts are created equal. I think on the bulletin last week I ran the quote, doubt your doubts. Because every doubt is a little different. There are emotional doubts. You're not struggling with the information. You're struggling to believe it may be, but you're not struggling with the facts of the information. There are intellectual doubts where you are wrestling with some pretty heavy concepts and you're working on them, trying to figure them out a little bit better. There are different sorts of doubts. And so what we have to recognize is the honesty that all doubts demand. You see a rebellious doubt? That's not the same thing as everything else. That's just like a cousin to disbelief. Are y'all following the family tree a little bit this morning? Folks, I think we need to be honest about some of that and recognize those differences. And if we're willing to doubt the information, we should be just as quick to doubt the questions. And maybe that's the practical. You say, what really is the practical side of this? You're struggling with some sort of a doubt? Start asking some questions. Why am I struggling with this question? Why? Do I have a reason somewhere that I'm struggling with this question? I'll tell you this sometimes, folks, we don't struggle with questions because the information has changed. We struggle with questions because our situation has changed. Let me illustrate that. I've met very few people in my life who have said, I'm really struggling with God's design of marriage. I've never really met anybody that was like, man, I'm just struggling with the belief that God made man and woman as husband and wife. Now, I have met some people who say, well, I'm really struggling with my belief that God would want that, when they're also struggling with a friend who's homosexual, or be struggling themselves with some homosexual desires. You see that? The information hasn't changed. The situation has changed. That's not the same thing. And folks, again, I think we need to ask some serious questions. Why am I feeling this way? Why do I believe this? Why has the circumstances changed? And we need to be honest. It's not the conflicting of new information. It's the conflicting of my own resistance and the information. I don't want to do what this is saying. I don't want to believe. It's funny when people start saying, well, I don't know if I believe the Bible. Yeah, it's because you don't do what the Bible says. I've met very few people who are like, I'm going to obey the Bible. And then they go, I'm really struggling to believe the Bible. But a whole lot of people who are like, I want to go live with my boyfriend. Or I want to engage in premarital sex. Or I want to express this same-sex attraction. Or I want to do, and then I don't really know if I believe the Bible anymore. Funny. Funny how that happened. Are we going to be honest? That's the question. Are we going to be honest with our doubts? They're not all the same. They're not all the same. How then should we respond? Look again at Mark 9. Look at Mark 9. Look at verse 24 again. How do we respond? Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Folks, this is us. I think this morning that there's probably nobody here that rejects the existence of God. If so, why are you here? But maybe if that's you, then come visit after services. We'll try to work on that a little bit. But everybody's probably in this boat. We believe in God. We believe in Jesus Christ. We're struggling to grow in that belief. You see? We're praying with the Father, help my unbelief. I do believe, but I need to grow, and that's where this goes. We're not yet where we should be. We're not yet where we could be, but we're also not yet where we one day will be. And the goal then is to continually grow, continually develop, continually draw closer to God. We don't yet see what we one day will. But we need to understand these two very distinguishable ideas. And then let's work on this third one. Look at Mark 1, please. Mark 1. I want to draw this idea out a little bit from several places in Mark's Gospel. The idea of developing faith. Mark 1, beginning in verse 16. As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, Mark 1:16, he saw Simon and Andrew his brother casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Jesus said to them, come after me, and I will make you become fishers of men. Chapter 2, please, verse 14. Chapter 2, verse 14. As he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax office, and said to him, follow me. He arose and followed him. Chapter 8, please. Chapter 8. Verse 34. Mark 8:34. When he called the people to him, Mark 8:34. He called the people to Him with His disciples also. He said to them, "Whoever desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." And we read it already, but read it again. Chapter 10, please. Chapter 10, verse 21. Mark 10, verse 21. Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said to him, "One thing you lack, go your way, sell whatever you have, give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, take up the cross, and follow me." Did y'all catch it? Did y'all catch the common thread in every one of those verses? Sometimes it was expressed a little differently. Sometimes it was just, "Come after me." Sometimes it was just, "Follow me." But did y'all catch it through all those verses? The idea then is, come after Jesus and to follow Him. Folks, to follow Jesus is a continual action. This is not following. Did y'all catch that? If you weren't watching, you missed me following. That's not a following, is it? A following denotes a continual action of movement. And that's exactly what Jesus is calling to the disciples in the first century. You want to follow me? Well, you're going to have to continue to follow. One step after another. Folks, struggling with doubts and struggling through doubts does not destroy the disciple. It is what makes the disciple. That's why we have to understand these concepts. I don't know a single strong, faithful disciple, for the most part, who has not wrestled with serious questions but got serious answers and put those questions away with stronger faith, with stronger resolve and resiliency. Folks, this is continuing to follow Him, continuing to come after Him, and developing more faith. That's what happens. When we wrestle with our faith, we develop more faith. When we wrestle with good questions, through investigation, through honesty, through work, through harmonizing the truth, through working with our brethren, we grow stronger. Can I capitalize on that for just a second? We'll go back to this underlying theme we've been working on here. A failure to understand these concepts has led many to ruin. Faith is not emotion. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is not, I feel a certain way. Faith is not a religious high. But sometimes that's how it's expressed. Well, I don't feel particularly close to God right now. I just must not have any faith. I don't feel particularly motivated right now. Well, I just must not have any faith. I don't feel particularly happy right now. I don't feel drawn to assembly. I don't feel like I want to go to worship. Well, I just must not have any faith. Guys, that's not faith. That's confusing those two terms. Faith instead drives us to do even when the feelings aren't there. Do we see that? I'm not sure that we always express it that way. But faith drives us beyond our feelings. In fact, faith takes us when feelings fail us. I don't feel very faithful right now. I don't feel very motivated or strong. That's where faith goes in, folks. And it's not just this abstract beliefism. No. You've heard me make the spiel many times. Faith is allegiance. It's loyalty to God. It's devotion to God. Think about it like this. Do you still express the ideas of love and fidelity to your spouse even when you don't feel like it? You better. You know, you might not be particularly loving right now. Probably not very lovable either. But what does your spouse do? Acts in faith, we sometimes say that, towards you even when you're not so lovable. Folks, that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to our fidelity to God. When we talk about our loving God, our devotion to God, our faith in God. Read the Psalms. I don't know, like 80% of the Psalms is the psalmist going, I don't feel very good right now in my faith, but I'm going to keep going. Or, to say it more bluntly, I hate everything in life right now, but you're still God and you're still good. That's a very loose paraphrase. But have you read the Psalms? Because that's exactly what the Psalms do. The Psalms balance these careful subjects to better understand them. These disciples were full of questions. I could take just a few minutes and hit about 5 or 6 questions within 2 or 3 chapters either direction right now. They're full of questions, asking questions, debating questions, and that's part of this. Throwing out those questions and seeking answers. Folks, you can be a Christian without having all the answers. You can have faith without knowing all the facts, without understanding all the facts. You can have conviction and commitment without all the comprehension. In fact, I think we need to understand that because the conflating of those ideas makes some of our young people feel like they have to know everything before they obey the gospel. Kind of like we talked about in Bible class a moment ago. If you've got to know everything to obey the gospel, then nobody should have ever obeyed the gospel. Folks, contrary to popular belief, you can be a Christian with doubts. Maybe I should say that one more time. You can be a Christian, faithful, committed, sincere, and still have doubts. Well, I just don't get this. That's okay. Faith sometimes is painfully honest. I want to plug in the Psalms again. Faith is sometimes raw and real, but faith also keeps going. That's part of this whole faith project. Struggling with God is part of it. Walking with God is indeed struggling with God, is wrestling with ideas, fighting through questions, and seeking good answers. Next month, I'm going to conclude that whole short series I've been doing on atheism versus Christianity, and the last question we're going to ask is, did Jesus rise from the dead? You might have a plethora of questions on peripheral issues. Well, what about this? What about that? How does this harmonize? How does this fit? Do these books matter? Should we have these over here? What about, the questions might be endless, but really, folks, the question of the Christian faith is, did Jesus rise from the dead? If He did, that one question trumps every other question. Jesus rose from the dead whether I believe it or not. Jesus rose from the dead whether I'm struggling with my belief in the wholesomeness of marriage. Jesus rose from the dead whether I believe in any other doctrine you want to throw out. Jesus rose from the dead. But maybe if we better understand these 3 subjects, not only will we be equipped to work through them ourselves, but we'll be equipped to have those important conversations with our brothers and sisters when they're fighting through some of this too. Because I know I'm not the only one in this room who has had a brother or a sister catch me in the foyer and say, I'm struggling with my faith. You had that happen? Put some of these ideas in your pocket. Disbelief is not doubt, and doubt is not disbelief. Question your doubts. Some of this is part of the developing process that faith demands. So if we can help you in some way this morning, maybe you've been working through some of these things, fighting through doubts and asking questions and just really unsure. I'm going to make a plug here. We do a monthly question and answer lesson that is specifically designed to answer questions you send me. So you better not say, well, I just never got to ask any questions. I will say you are wrong. Maybe that's where you are. We want to help. If there's a way that we can this morning, we'd invite you to make it known now as we stand and as we sing.